There's an old coin from a city called Cyrene, on the coast of what's now Libya. It's over 2,000 years old, and stamped right on the back of it isn't a king, or a god, or a soldier. It's a plant. That plant was called silphium, and at one point, it was worth more than its weight in silver. People crushed it into medicine, cooked with it, and used it for something else too, something that made it one of the most valuable crops in the entire ancient Mediterranean. Women used it to keep from getting pregnant. Silphium doesn't exist anymore. It's extinct. Some historians think it was harvested into oblivion because the demand for it never stopped. Think about that for a second. An entire plant species gone because so many people across the ancient world wanted control over when they had children. And here's the thing. Silphium wasn't some rare secret. It's just the most famous example of something women all over the ancient world were doing. In Egypt, in Greece, in Rome, across the Islamic world, in medieval Europe. Long before anyone understood hormones or biology the way we do now, women were already trying to manage their own fertility, using whatever plants and methods experience had taught them to trust. Quite a bit of it turned out to be genuinely clever, and modern science has since confirmed some of it actually worked. Other parts were risky, or simply did nothing at all. This is a story about that effort, about the plants, the recipes, the physicians, and the ordinary women who spent thousands of years trying to answer a question that's still relevant today. Let's start with Cyrene, and that plant on the coin. Cyrene was a Greek colony, founded on the coast of North Africa around the 7th century BCE. It sat on a strip of land where, for reasons nobody has ever fully explained, silphium grew and grew well, and almost nowhere else on Earth. People tried. Farmers in other regions attempted to transplant it, to grow it from seed in different soil. It didn't take. Silphium seemed to need that exact stretch of coastline, and that made it rare in a way that gold isn't. You can mine gold anywhere you find it. You could only get silphium from Cyrene. So the city built its entire economy around a plant. They put it on their coins. They put it on their pottery. Roman writers described it as being worth its weight in silver, sometimes more. And Roman and Greek sources, including physicians and naturalists like Soranus and Pliny the Elder, wrote that women used silphium and plants closely related to it to prevent pregnancy or to bring on a delayed period. Now, we should be honest about what we do and don't know here. We don't have silphium anymore to test in a lab. It's been extinct for close to 2,000 years. But we do have its closest living relative, a plant called asafoetida, still used in cooking across South Asia today. And modern researchers have found that asafoetida does have some effect on reproductive hormones in animal studies. So it's not far-fetched to think silphium worked, at least to some degree. It wasn't nonsense. It was observation, repeated by enough people over enough generations that an entire economy grew up around it. And that's really the pattern we're going to see again and again in this story. Long before anyone had a microscope, people were noticing patterns. This plant seems to help. This one seems to cause harm. This one does nothing at all. And they passed that knowledge down, mother to daughter, healer to apprentice, for centuries. Silphium eventually ran out. Overharvesting, some ancient writers guessed. Maybe climate changes or overgrazing by livestock dried up the exact conditions it needed. By the 1st century of the Roman Empire, it was already considered rare. Pliny the Elder wrote that only a single stalk had been found in his lifetime, and it was sent to the Emperor Nero as a curiosity. After that, historical mentions of silphium mostly stop. It just disappears, the way species do. But the desire that made silphium so valuable didn't disappear with it. Women kept looking for answers. And some of the clearest evidence for that comes from a country with a much longer written record than Cyrene ever had, ancient Egypt. Around 1800 BCE, someone in Egypt wrote out a medical text we now call the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus. It's one of the oldest medical documents in the world, and it deals almost entirely with women's health, pregnancy, fertility, childbirth, and yes, how to prevent conception. Picture the world these women lived in. Egypt ran on the Nile. Farmers watched the river rise every summer and planned their entire year around it. Childbirth was common, but it was also dangerous. Dangerous enough that avoiding an unwanted pregnancy could be a matter of survival, not convenience. So it makes sense that Egyptian physicians, and midwives, and ordinary women were experimenting with ways to prevent it. The recipes recorded in these papyri call for a mixture applied before intercourse, most often built around crushed acacia gum, mixed with dates and honey, sometimes formed into a kind of paste. It sounds strange to modern ears, but here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Acacia, when it ferments, produces lactic acid, and lactic acid is a spermicide. It's still used in some modern contraceptive formulations today. So an Egyptian woman, more than 3,500 years ago, was using a substance that modern reproductive science has actually validated. She didn't know why it worked. She just knew, from generations of trial and observation, that it did. Not everything in these texts holds up, though, and we should say that plainly. Some Egyptian recipes also mention other ingredients that had no real effect, and a few, frankly, sound more like folk belief than medicine. That's worth remembering as we go through this story. Ancient people were smart and observant, and they got a surprising amount right, but they were also working without any way to test their ideas the way we can now. Some of what they tried simply didn't work, and some of it was based on symbolism more than biology. Still, what's remarkable is that this knowledge was written down at all, preserved, copied, and passed on for centuries. Women's reproductive health wasn't hidden away or treated as shameful in Egyptian medical writing. It was documented, the same way a broken bone or a fever would be. And that attitude, treating fertility control as ordinary medical knowledge, shows up again a bit later, in Greece. By the 5th century BCE, Greek medicine had its own body of writing on this subject, much of it collected under the name of Hippocrates, even though it was really the work of many different physicians over time. One ingredient shows up again and again in these Greek texts: pomegranate. Specifically, the root and the seeds. Physicians recommended it as a way to prevent pregnancy, and later researchers have actually looked into why. Pomegranate contains compounds that, in some animal studies, appear to have estrogen-like effects, which can interfere with ovulation. Once again, ancient observation lines up, at least partly, with what modern science can measure. Greek writers also described other methods: physical barriers, herbal potions taken before or after intercourse, and recommendations around timing. Some of this reflects real anatomical curiosity. Greek physicians were trying to understand the menstrual cycle, even without the hormonal picture we have today, and they were drawing conclusions, some accurate, some not, about when a woman was more or less likely to conceive. What's worth noticing here is who was doing this thinking. It wasn't just midwives working from oral tradition. It was physicians, men with formal training and a reputation to protect, writing openly about contraception as a legitimate part of medicine. That tells you something about how ordinary this need was considered to be, at least among the people educated enough to leave a written record. That tradition of formal medical writing on the subject reached what might be its most detailed ancient expression a few centuries later, in Rome, in the writing of a physician named Soranus. Soranus of Ephesus practiced medicine in Rome in the early 2nd century CE. He wrote a text simply called Gynecology, and it's remarkable, honestly, how thorough it is. It reads less like folklore and more like an actual medical manual, organized, detailed, and clearly based on years of clinical observation. Soranus made a distinction that still matters today. He separated contraception, preventing conception in the first place, from abortion, ending a pregnancy already underway. And notably, he preferred the first over the second. He wrote that it was safer and better to prevent conception than to destroy a fetus once it had formed, which tells us this wasn't some fringe idea in Roman medicine. It was a mainstream physician making a mainstream medical argument, almost 2,000 years ago. His recommendations ranged from the practical to the frankly odd by modern standards. He suggested certain plant-based substances applied before intercourse, some of which, like the Egyptian acacia recipes, had genuine spermicidal properties. He also recommended things like a woman holding her breath and moving her body in specific ways immediately after intercourse, based on the idea that this could help prevent the movement of semen toward the uterus. That part doesn't hold up to modern anatomy, but it shows the kind of careful, cause and effect thinking Roman physicians were applying to the problem, even when their conclusions were wrong. It's easy to imagine a Roman woman visiting a physician like Soranus, maybe already the mother of several children, maybe having nearly died in a previous childbirth, and asking, quite reasonably, are there ways I can prevent this from happening again? And getting, in response, an actual structured answer. backed by a text that other doctors were reading and referencing. That kind of formal, written medical tradition didn't stay only in Greece and Rome. A few centuries later, it would be carried forward, expanded, and refined by physicians working across an entirely different part of the world. By the 10th and 11th centuries, cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba had become major centers of medical scholarship. Physicians there weren't just preserving older Greek and Roman texts, they were testing them, correcting them, and adding new observations of their own. One of the most influential physicians of this era was Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. In his massive medical encyclopedia, the Canon of Medicine, completed in the early 11th century, he included an entire section on preventing pregnancy, listing over a dozen different substances and methods that physicians of the time believed could work. One method that shows up in several Islamic medical texts from this period, building on older Greek ideas, involves a natural sea sponge, moistened and used as a physical barrier before intercourse. It's a simple idea, blocking rather than chemically preventing, and it's not so different in principle from barrier methods used today. Physicians of this era were clearly thinking in terms of mechanism, not just tradition. What physically stops this from happening, rather than only what plant has always been said to help. This period also produced serious writing on female anatomy and the menstrual cycle, building carefully on Greek foundations while correcting some of their mistakes. It's a reminder that this whole story isn't really one continuous line, running through a single culture. It's more like a relay. Knowledge passed from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to Rome, from Rome into the Islamic world, refined and added to at every stop, then eventually carried into medieval Europe. And in medieval Europe, some of that knowledge ended up in the hands of a woman physician whose name has survived for nearly 1,000 years. In the Italian city of Salerno, home to one of medieval Europe's most respected medical schools, a body of medical writing associated with a woman named Trotula circulated starting in the 12th century. Historians still debate exactly how much of it she wrote herself versus compiled from other sources, but the texts bearing her name focused specifically on women's health, at a time when very little medical writing did. These texts, and other herbal knowledge passed down through medieval midwives, mention plants like pennyroyal and rue. Both were widely believed across medieval and early modern Europe to interfere with pregnancy. And here's where we have to be honest and careful, because this part of the story isn't a happy one. Pennyroyal and rue are genuinely toxic. They can cause severe liver damage and other serious harm. And history records real cases of women being poisoned by them, sometimes fatally, while trying to use them for exactly this purpose. Unlike the acacia gum in Egypt, or the sea sponges of the Islamic world, this is a case where ancient trial and error came at a terrible cost. It's important to sit with that for a moment, honestly, without rushing past it. This wasn't a story where every ancient method turns out to have secretly worked all along. Women were operating with real medical knowledge in some cases, and with dangerous guesswork in others, and often they had no way to tell the difference. They were taking real risks with their own bodies because the alternative, an unplanned pregnancy in a world without modern medicine, could be just as risky, or worse. That's the harder truth sitting underneath this whole story. This wasn't a lighthearted subject for the women living it. It was survival, and sometimes it cost them everything they were trying to protect. So what do we actually take from all this? From a coin in Cyrene, to a recipe on an Egyptian papyrus, to a Roman physician's textbook, to a scholar in Baghdad, to a dangerous herb in a medieval garden. Here's one thing. This wasn't a modern idea. The desire to control if and when to have a child isn't something that showed up with modern medicine or modern attitudes. It's been there as long as we have written records, and probably long before that. Every culture we've looked at today, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, arrived at the same basic need, independently, and tried to answer it with the tools they had. And some of those tools were better than we might expect. Acacia gum really does have spermicidal properties. Pomegranate really does contain hormone-affecting compounds. A moistened sponge really is a physical barrier. Ancient people, working purely from observation and repetition, without microscopes or hormone tests, got real pieces of the biology right. That's worth respecting. But we shouldn't romanticize it either. For every method that worked, there was probably another that did nothing. or one like pennyroyal that actively caused harm. Ancient women weren't operating with certainty. They were operating with hope, community knowledge, and a whole lot of trial and error, often at real personal risk. Modern reproductive medicine exists because, eventually, science could finally test which of these ideas were real and which weren't, and give women options that didn't carry the same danger. Go back to that coin one more time. A plant, stamped in silver, from a city that built its whole economy around something that doesn't exist anymore. Silphium is extinct now, but the question it was grown to answer never went anywhere. Women asked it in Cyrene, they asked it in Thebes and Athens and Rome and Baghdad and Salerno. They're still asking it today. Some coins just take longer than others to stop mattering.